Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for coming tonight. On behalf of the President, Bill Houston of the National Wildlife Federation Board of Directors, the staff, and all of our partners, we welcome you tonight to this wonderful, wonderful webinar. I'm Amy Parker, and I'm the former head of fisheries in this country at U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and happen to serve on the board of the National Wildlife Federation. Had over a 30-year career at U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, 20 of those years in the field, outdoors, working hard, but also having some challenges, which is what we're going to talk about tonight. I am here in Northern Virginia and have to say that I am near the grounds of the ancestral grounds of Pocahontas and all of those individuals in her family and before that roamed the floodplains of the Potomac River near Great Falls, Virginia in the Washington, D.C. area. We honor their lands now and in the past. This is also the land that's near where my grandmother's grandmother, Anne Rollins, a slave, came to this country, and she migrated to southern Arkansas. Of course, she had many of the challenges that you're going to hear about tonight when you hear from this great panel and others as we talk about how do we create safe places in the outdoors. However, she also had resiliency. And that's something that we want to really focus on tonight. Our panel that we have here tonight, they are resilient. They are pioneers. They're individuals that have really, really overcome many of their fears to get to where they are today. And they have some great suggestions and recommendations on ways in which we can create a safer outdoors. And so I'm excited about this opportunity. What I'm most excited about is that I'm not doing this alone. I am pleased to announce and to present to you my co-moderator, and that's David Mizejewski. And I'm sorry about that, Dave. I'm blushing and you can't tell. Dave he has appeared on the Wendy Williams show. He's been on Good Morning America. He's also done work with Martha Stewart. Even the Links Incorporated, over 1,000 women heard him speak. Dave, we're excited. He's the National Wildlife Federation Chief Naturalist. Good evening, Dave.
Hi, Mamie. So good to see you. So good to see everybody. I want to start by thanking you, Mamie, for inviting me into this space. I think it's my privilege and honor to be here to help facilitate this conversation. And my goal is to do as little talking as possible. I want to help facilitate everybody else who's here tonight. And we've got this tremendous panel of outdoor enthusiasts from the Black community, and we're going to be hearing from them and hearing their experiences, their stories, their insights. And some of that is not all happy stories. Some of it is going to be diving into some of those challenges. That's what we're here to unpack and talk about tonight, with an eye towards moving forward, finding solutions, and making the outdoor space welcoming to everybody, no matter what they look like. And so before we dive into that, though, I want to give you another little shout out, Mamie, because you are a pioneer in the sense that we recognize that Black people have always been in the outdoors and have always been working to make those spaces safer. And so it's not just about, sort of the negative stories, it's recognition that this work has been ongoing. And, at the National Wildlife Federation, we're hoping to continue that movement and elevate it and bring it to the place where it really needs to be. And I just am curious if you have any stories to share from your experience as a pioneer.
Well, I tell you, it is amazing because this is a very, very, really emotional, part of what I have to say, because I'd like to not think about some of these experiences, but it would not be very fair to others for us not to talk about them, Dave, as you can imagine. But I often talked about my mother because she was that avid angler that taught me to keep going and growing. And she was the one that really introduced me to the outdoors, but she died 2 weeks before I graduated. And it was with her death that I learned all about living And so when we think about what we as pioneers have had to do in the outdoors and what we've had to overcome, I think it's all about us continuing to go and grow. It's about us having confidence, building confidence. It's about us really, really having a lot of courage. And because there weren't always times where we felt welcome, where people gave us the look to say, why are you here? You don't belong here. There have been times when people have actually said that to us. In fact, I have experiences where when I walked 2 miles to get to a stream, across a soybean field. And again, I get emotional just thinking about it. And I walked there to look at a stream and a wetland near there. And on the way back to my car, of course, there on my car was in white shoe polish, the N word written all over my car. I've had other experiences where my tires have been pretty much, the air let out of my tires. And, it's really difficult to think about that not only do you have to perform, David, but you have to also perform at the highest level because you are a pioneer representing people, and then you have to overcome these incidents. But over time, you have to be resilient, you have to be courageous, you have to keep going and growing, stay in the game. I've cried, I have some experiences about crying, in fact, but the times that I did cry, I remember being in the Department of the Interior, and I tell this story on NPR, where I went in the bathroom because a high-level official doing a meeting from the Department of Defense basically said, I can't believe you think that you can stop work that's going to really keep us from doing national security, the work that we have to do for some endangered species. And it was the tone and the delivery and the word you that let me believe that it was more than about just another person from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. I went in the bathroom to cry, but there were those janitors in that bathroom, and they told me, girl, wipe your face and you come on out of there and you show them what you can do. They reminded me, these ladies and others, and I know the panel will tell you this, they remind you that there are people like Harriet Tubman. They've been out there all along in the wilderness doing great things outdoors. George Washington Carver, the late Pearlie Reed in the Department of Agriculture, pioneers that have been there all along. Mr. Audubon himself, yes, his mother came from a Black community. Also, his assistant worked closely with him, and from what I understand and read, did a lot of that work as well. We have Robert Bullard, our father of environmental justice, again, a pioneer that's not always had it easy out in the outdoors. I think about my friend Leslie Frazier, who worked for EPA, and she's also, I know, had some of those experiences herself. But what we've learned as I close, we've learned to keep our courage. We've learned to be confidential over time. Confidence, something certainly that was important, and we have done it with class. We know when to speak up, and we know when to shut up. We know that it's important, as Colin Powell says, and I look for him and his encouragement. He encouraged us too to keep going and growing. But what he said is get mad and get over it. And I think that's important. Sometimes we had to listen to people at Disney when they said, get over it. They said, Frozen, let it go. So there were times that we had to do that. And I know that the panelists would tell you more examples of things that have happened to them. And I thank you for this opportunity to just share with you a little bit of my experience. But mostly what I'll say is been allies that really have helped me keep going and growing. It's been my family. It's been allies that haven't always been there all of the time, but I know that if I needed them, they were there for me, David.
Well, thank you for sharing that story, Mamie. I think, again, you're an inspiration, and I think we can all use some of your secret sauce there in staying positive and focusing on that positive change. So you mentioned allies, and I want to give a recognition to all the tremendous partners that are bringing you this webinar tonight. Hosted by my organization, the National Wildlife Federation, but also Outdoor Afro, Patagonia, Black AF and STEM, and the Links Incorporated that Mamie mentioned earlier. So this, really huge thanks to everybody that has come together to put this on so that we can begin to have these important discussions, or continue to have these important discussions, and again, move towards a better future. One last bit of housekeeping before we get into the actual panels, which is what you're all here for. And that is we are live streaming, but we're not set up to take live questions from the audience. However, many folks submitted questions. So after we get through a few, preliminary questions for the panelists, we'll dive into some of those questions at the end. So stay tuned, and we're going to dive into that. Before we do, I do want to introduce Colin O'Mara. He is the president of the National Wildlife Federation, and he has a few words to kick us off. Colin?
No, thank you, David, and thank you all for joining us tonight for this incredibly important conversation. And I just want to also reiterate David's praise of Dr. Mamie Parker. Mamie joined our board, I guess, about a year and a half ago, and we're having some real talk, right? And I think this is the kind of conversation that has been not surfaced in a lot of white-led organizations for a long time. And I just want to say, I just can't say enough about Dr. Parker. Mamie is a friend, a mentor, an inspiration. And I just want to thank her for working with Dave, working with Mustafa Santiago Ali, Rebecca Villegas, Keith Ward, the whole team that's worked on putting together this event. We're serious, and we want to really try to change the conversation in this country and lift up work that's being done in corners across the country, and really make sure that work's taken to the next level. And look, similar to the racist policies that have produced the racial disparities we see all across the country, it's also pertained to who has access to clean air, clean water, clean air, or clean land. And the conservation movement has a racist past to reckon with. And thanks to leaders and pioneers in the Black communities, progress has been made. Yet scholars such as Dorceta Taylor have indicated that it's absolutely undeniable that the conservation movement has been influenced and molded by several racist white urban elites. And I highly recommend everyone read Dr. Taylor's book, The Rise of the American Conservation Movement, and where she looks at folks like Madison Grant and Gifford Pinchot and John Muir and others, in the way in which they kind of imposed their vision, and how that's kind of shaped the conservation movement today, a past that we are still reckoning with and have to undo to make sure that everyone has the ability to enjoy our great resources. And so in addition to the conservation movement as a whole, there's organizations like mine that I think have to recognize and reckon with our past and make amends and move forward in a more anti-racist way. And so the white supremacy culture is deeply embedded in a lot of the ways that we do business. We are actively trying to take strides to transform our organization right now through our equity and justice work and our environmental justice initiatives, and really want to do this with communities. Again, I think there's this kind of white knight insanity that comes out of some conversation. We want to do it with communities in authentic ways, under the leaders of folks like Dr. Parker. We've had amazing board leadership over the years from like Diane Dillon Ridgely and Kent Salazar, incoming board chair, Mustafa Santiago Ali and Shantae Coleman, both of whom are vice presidents, but making sure we're doing this work together, that we're learning and we're listening and we're moving forward together. So as mentioned earlier, we're not the first organization to initiate these conversations. There are several Black leaders and organizations that have paved the way, but we just want to help support these ongoing efforts. I am so excited. The panelists are amazing. My good friend Wayne here, a few others that you're going to hear from, but we really want to make sure that we are working together, hand in hand. And there's that great old proverb that if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. We want to go together and get this right, so future generations really can live in an anti-racist society. So with that, Dr. Parker, Mamie, let me turn it back to you.
Thank you so much, Colin, for your words of wisdom and your support. And again, you've done a great job in celebrating the staff at National Wildlife Federation. Rebecca and Julia, they've been there to provide their support, and Mustafa allowed us to do that. But John Robbins from our board and other members from our board, Miguel and others from our board, Mike Bartlett, they've been here all along with us and helping us plan this event tonight. So we're excited about that. Believe it or not, tonight we had over 1,400, almost 1,500 people to register for this webinar. And that's a record setting in itself. And we're so excited that you were all able to do that. And so we want to talk about barriers, and we want to hear from Lynn Scarlett, and she's going to help us and talk not only about barriers, but also give us some things that her secret sauce, Dave mentioned earlier, her secret sauce. Lynn is an environmental policy, climate change expert. She worked for 2 presidents. She is the former CEO and Deputy Secretary of the Department of the Interior. Lynn also served as the the secretary, the acting secretary of the Department of the Interior as well. She's an analyst. More importantly, right now she serves as the Nature Conservancy's chief external affairs officer. She loves birding and she loves dragonflies, and she's often out there doing a great thing. Lynn, you stepped up to leadership too as the executive co-sponsor of TNC's Black Employees Resource Group. And so we're happy to have you here to give us some words and encouragement, and welcome.
Thank you, Mamie. It is such an incredible privilege to be invited to be part of this conversation. And I have to say, Mamie was one of the first people I met when I went to the Interior Department, and she immediately inspired me. And in fact, Mamie, I remember a lot of your mother's phrases: no deposit, no return, and there are some others that I keep stashed in my head. I'm so pleased to participate in this event. Thank you, Colin, and thank you, the panelists, for this dialogue. As Mamie said, I've had the great privilege at the Interior Department and now at the Nature Conservancy to learn from people like Mamie and so many others. I learned of Mamie's lifelong outdoor heritage of fishing, a passion that led her to become a biologist and shape her career. I learned from African-American leaders in the National Park Service. And at the Nature Conservancy, I continue to learn from colleagues, especially, as Mamie mentioned, through our employee resource group, LEAD, our League of Employees of African Descent. And I've had my own experiences too, as an avid birder, a hiker, a nature photographer. And during the pandemic and shutdown, I've gone every single weekend during this pandemic to Huntley Meadows, a local wetland and woodland just south of Arlington, Virginia. And there I experienced the joys of birding and meeting other birders and photographers. And what I love is this is an incredibly diverse group. Maybe a quarter of the photographers are African Americans. And also the group includes people from Asia, Latin America, Russia, people from around the globe. And we all share the joys of birds, beavers, otters, deer, frogs, plants of all sorts. Yes, Mamie, those dragonflies. We all share the joys of nature and art and camaraderie. I love that. We've become sort of an informal club. We post pictures on a special website. We share bird information and more. This incredibly diverse group sharing our love of nature and all that goes with it. We're lucky because this is a safe place. It's a safe space for everyone: joggers, dog walkers, birders, photographers, children, and adults. But I know that the rest of the world around us is not always that safe. I feel a profound, I search for the right words: horror, sorrow, indignation when I hear Mamie's stories, a deep sense of injustice when I learn of Black birders or joggers or hikers abused, murdered even. We have to engage together everywhere and in all matters to bring justice and equity to this world, to this nation, to all places and spaces. And safety in nature is one essential part of this urgent moral mission. Mamie asked me to share a few thoughts about what I've learned and how I think about this mission. And I want to start by saying, first, like all life, there's no one story, no single experience. So many African Americans have deep connections with nature, people like Mamie and so many others. But some, like my daughter's students in East Oakland, California, where she taught some years ago, had never had an opportunity to enjoy nature. Some, when my daughter wanted to take them to a local park, told her they had never been to a park. They'd never walked on any surface other than urban streets and sidewalks. Thus, safe spaces and places mean different things to each individual, but there's a common thread. That common thread is the desire for opportunity, for welcome, for safety. And yet that desire is not uniformly fulfilled. Places are not always welcoming. Safety outdoors is not assured. Opportunity to access and enjoy the outdoors is not available to all. I had the great privilege while I was at Interior to lay the groundwork for creating the Harriet Tubman National Historic Park, a place of learning, of celebrating the inspiring life of Harriet Tubman, someone I've admired since I first learned about her in grade school. And it is situated, this park, among fields and adjacent woods. But so many of our outdoor places, our parks and refuges, do not tell the story of African Americans. They do not create a sense of welcoming. And it's hard to feel safe, I think, and to be safe where one feels unwelcome. And so this brings me to my third reflection. Policies, programs, and money matter. For children like those my daughter taught, we need programs and outdoor places that give easy access to nature, whether for hiking or camping or birding or jogging or every other opportunity. And yet that desire is not uniformly fulfilled. Places are not always welcoming. Safety outdoors, as I noted, is not assured. Opportunity to access and enjoy the outdoors is not available to all. So my final reflection is this. As a white woman, I think among our biggest challenges is to acknowledge that systemic racism infuses our institutions. And that means assuring safety and access and welcome require more than programs and interpretive signs. Enduring safety means fundamental changes in how we show up. It means reimagining a better present and future. It means engaging with allies, and it requires a deep honesty of what that world around us looks like, at the injustices, at that systemic racism that we all perceive and many people experience directly. So I want to just close with a quote of Harriet Tubman. She observed, and I quote, "Always remember, you have within you the strength, the patience, and the passion to reach for the stars to change the world." Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Lynn. And we're proud to say that today's Lynn's birthday. So we want to say happy birthday, Lynn. And I'm sure that if we could, we'd all sing to you, right, David? But I don't know if that would be very well taken right now. But happy birthday. And we're so glad that you were born. More importantly, we thank you for those wonderful comments. Wow, David, we're getting off to a great start.
That's right.
Okay, so now it's time to hear from the panel, which is why you guys are here. Again, they won't have all the time that they need to do all the great things that they want to do. We won't be able to really dig deep, but we're going to give it our best shot. We did have the University of Michigan law students to talk to us and write for us in a white paper because we are using a model that Mustafa Ali and others at the National Wildlife Federation used from some of their other roundtables to tell us about those challenges, the barriers, the accessibility, the affordability, the childhood experiences that were limited, historical trauma and physical safety concerns, as well as racism and cultural factors that Lynn mentioned earlier. I don't belong here, you don't belong here. Those types of comments are surely ones that we're here. But today you're going to hear from this outstanding panel, and I'm so proud to say that each individual on the panel I've had a chance to interact with and work with and really like hanging out in the outdoors with when I get the opportunity to do so. And so we're going to ask each of them to spend about 3 minutes and in that introduction to tell you why they are here and why they care. And we believe that's important, but also talk to you about the barriers and talk to you about opportunities for building coalitions and bridges along the way to make this better. And so I've also told them they only had 3 minutes. And I said, if you go more than 3 minutes, I'm going to go, okay. And then when I stand up, I'm no longer going to be Mamie Parker or Dr. Parker. I'm going to be Ma Parker. And that's not going to be very pleasant. And so I know that they will follow the 3-minute rule. And so we'll start first with our panelist, Shelton Johnson, Yosemite National Park, Oprah's favorite ranger. Shelton, welcome. You're still on mute. Let's see if we can get you off mute.
There we go.
There you go. Hi, Shelton.
Hi. I want to start off by saying thank you very much, Mamie. I don't know if I'm Oprah's favorite ranger, but I may be one of the few rangers that she has actually met. But that was a great experience inviting her to Yosemite National Park along with Gail King to basically issue a welcome to all African Americans and by extension to all people of color that national parks are a common inheritance and all people own. They're American citizens and the world to an extension because Yosemite is a World Heritage Site, owns all of these places. And African Americans, we don't usually grow up to feel that these places, which innately, culturally speaking, can be foreign to us, we're tasked with thinking of them as being part of our own private property. But we own the Grand Canyon, we own Zion, we own Canyonlands, we own America's best idea, but we have yet to collect that inheritance. And I knew this full well growing up in Detroit. I grew up in Detroit in the inner city. Grandfather worked for Ford Motor Company on an assembly line. My father served in the military in Vietnam and Korea. He was in Berlin right after World War II. And the reason why we're having this conversation right now, and I'm part of this very distinguished panel, is because there was a family trip. We lived with my father in Germany, and there was a family trip to Berchtesgaden, which is a sister park to Yosemite National Park, high in the Bavarian Alps. And I was 5 years old and I was standing between my mother and my father. I felt that sense of elevation. I looked up and saw these banners of snow unfurling from these mountain peaks, the blue of the sky beyond, and I was cold and it bit right into my bones. And I never felt so liberated in my life because my parents held me to the earth because the wind never stopped blowing when you're in the mountains. And I felt I was going to be blown away by all those winds, but I was kept in place by my mother and my father, and they've passed on, but I can still feel their hands in mine. They're still keeping me on this earth because I have work to do. And that work is keeping that story of these African-American soldiers who served in Yosemite and Sequoia National Park in 1899, 1903, and 1904, and whose service was subsequently almost completely forgotten. Not completely, but almost is close enough. And so for the last 23 years or so, I've been bringing that story back, and that led me to inviting Oprah and Gail to come to the park because so few of our people, of African Americans and people of color by extension, see national parks as their inheritance. So I felt that I had an objective, I had a mission for them to have an enchanted childhood. You know, there's a great writer right here in Yosemite who's passed on by the name of Shirley Sargent. She wrote a book called Enchanted Childhoods, and it's always struck me how few African Americans have an enchanted childhood. If you grow up in the inner city, you grow up in urban America, your idea of a park is vastly different than John Muir's idea of Yosemite, of a cathedral space where you feel one with the infinite, one with eternity. So I'm just feeling that basically, sorry.
That's okay. That's probably your alarm to wrap up too, right?
That's right. That's right. You know, that was the government within me stepping outside me and saying, it's time to wrap it up. But no, I'm just happy to be here and I'm happy to be part of this group. But I'm just hoping that through our conversation, we can encourage more communities of color, especially African Americans, to claim their inheritance in America's best idea. And I'll be in Yosemite waiting for you to come and I'll give you a tour.
Thank you so much. And your points are well taken about action. This is all about action oriented. We don't just talk, we are actually doing things as well. And that's what this panel is all about. Thank you so much. Okay, our next panelist is Dr. Christopher Shell. He's at the University of Washington. Dr. Chris, hi.
Hey there, y'all. Thank you again for having me, and thank you quite a bit for having me on this panel with a bunch of esteemed colleagues I look up to quite a bit. So a lot of my research, which I do at the University of Washington Tacoma, but will starting in July of 2021 be doing at UC Berkeley, is trying to understand these links between society and ecology and evolution and what that means, not just for the way in which organisms live in our cities, but also what that means for us generally, what that means for the way in which we think about the world, and quite literally quantifying the ways in which residential segregation, systemic oppression, racism, economic inequality are these ecological issues that shape all of the conversations we have. So if you're a conservationist on this call, if you're a wildlife manager on this call, if you're somebody that's interested in the natural world, the way in which we treat each other and the way in which we treat our communities is in of itself a benefit or a harm to those natural communities. So the loss of, say, native birds in the region, the loss of many endemic rodents, the loss of many species across not just this nation, but the globe is very directly and indirectly tied to the way in which we treat each other. And that's baked into the landscape. Legacies of oppression, whether it be redlining, urban renewal, white flight, have all influenced where the animals are. And for me, I started this journey as a young kid, just being that kid that loves to watch Nat Geo shows. And at 5 would be watching animals move across the landscape. But very early on, growing up in Los Angeles, knew that my house was not the same as my white counterparts. I would walk down the street and wouldn't see that much vegetation. And then all of a sudden would see these trees in their neighborhoods in Los Angeles that I had never seen before in my life. Seeing birds I had never heard before, seeing different species I had never experienced. But one thing that was pretty resonant, which I study to this day, are coyotes. So I study coyotes and raccoons and how they move through the city. And they essentially are my sentinels, my tie back to myself, back to my ancestors, to tell the stories that are baked into the concrete of the cities that we live in, that affects the entire globe and affects the conversations that we have. And breaking down and deconstructing the barriers to who actually belongs in nature. And it's all of us, right? As Shelton had just brought up, collect your inheritance. We have been in these natural landscapes for quite a long time. And even in urban landscapes, there are natural landscapes that we continue to be stewards of. And the animals that I study oftentimes give us that Michael Jackson look back in the mirror reflection of those stories.
Thank you so much. Boy, that was really powerful. Talking about Michael Jackson, the man in the mirror. It's all about looking at yourself. So thank you so much. We appreciate that, Dr. Chris. Our next speaker is Dr. Harrison Pickney. And Harrison is at Clemson University, and he's had a chance to work with some state parks. And I met him on a webinar where he was talking about the state parks and that influence. So Dr. Harrison Pickney, welcome.
Thank you for having me. Glad to be here. I will start by saying that I know Dr. Park asked us to sort of talk about our story and our connection to the outdoors. I don't really consider myself an outdoors person, but interestingly enough, I had parents who were, especially my dad, who is very much attached to the outdoors. So as a kid growing up, we would spend summer vacations visiting the Grand Canyon or the Petrified Forest. And my middle name, of all things, is Parker, which I'm sure Mamie knows this means keeper of the park. And so I just sort of, I guess my parents just sort of spoke this over my life from the beginning, that this is what we were supposed to do. And so my work here in South Carolina is much more focused on Black youth in particular, and how do we create opportunities to protect, our Black youth physically, emotionally, socially, and how do we create opportunities where they don't experience barriers such as the outdoors are not for you, or this is a white space, for example. So I look at a range of settings around Black youth in particular, and one of those settings happens on occasion to be the outdoors, but typically in those settings always bring a partner along who is much more versed in the outdoor literature. But I'm glad to be here, really more so than anything to learn from some of the panelists and hopefully partner on some future work.
Thank you so much, Dr. Harrison. Dr. Parker Pickney, the fourth. So we appreciate your words, and also looking ahead, because it's all about the next generational conservationists for sure. So our next speaker is Wayne Hubbard, and Wayne is a television personality, but he's also on several councils and commissions and with secretaries, and he's with the Urban American production. So Wayne, welcome.
All right. Get the chicken grease hot. That's what I tell people. Let's do what we got to do. So I am Wayne Hubbard, and I co-founded Urban American Outdoors. For the last 22 years. We created a group and a business that was designed to show positive images of Black people in the outdoors. One of the issues that we saw is that starting this, we didn't see anyone that looked like me. So we created Urban American Outdoors, this TV show, and we won awards. But I want to talk a little bit about my background. I'm an old country boy from Oklahoma. My grandmother was Black Cherokee freedman, and my grandfather was a Buffalo soldier. So I tell people I didn't find the outdoors. The outdoors is part of my heritage. And I think about that because my family gardened, they farmed, they were hunter-harvesters, so they hunted and fished and all that. But I always think about my grandmother would tell me when I would go out by myself, she would tell me, she'd pull me to the side and say, hey, the forest has plenty of trees and rope is cheap. Be careful. Mm-hmm. And it didn't resonate on me to end that she was really concerned about that. But she also talked to us about our history and talked about the legacy that we had as African Americans in this space. So when I started Urban American Outdoors, that was a reflection of the people that I knew that was part of my past. And when I came to this urban interface in Kansas City, I didn't see anything that looked like me. I didn't see anything in the media. So we created this space, Urban American Outdoors. And so we've aired here in the States, UK, Ireland, Africa, Brazil, Okinawa, Japan. But I've been blessed also to sit on some federal advisory councils. I've also been able to sit on some councils with Colin O'Meara, my guy up there, and we've done some work together. But I realized that if I wasn't in the room, no one was talking about us. And I realized how difficult this experience is. So I want to thank everyone on here, the call that we're having this, because it's not easy being out in this space. And it's really, truly about engaging all communities, but us that we're seen. So I just want to say thank you for coming out here and looking at us, because as much as I'm glad that you're there, I'm happy that you're seeing us.
Great. Thank you so much. And you want to introduce the next speaker for us?
All right. I cannot do any of the work that I do without Candace Price on here. She is the executive producer and she keeps me in line. So I'm going to pass the mic.
Passing the mic on to his wife, Candace Price. Candace, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you.
No, thank you so much. It's such a pleasure, and I'm so glad that Dr. Parker got in touch with us and told us I'm doing this panel. So just I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I'm Candace Price, and I'm the executive producer of Urban American Outdoors, co-founder. And Wayne, who you just met, is the host. And one of the things when we first put this together 22 years ago was that we did not see representation of anyone Black in the outdoors or in their magazines, media whatsoever. My background was in media, broadcast, music, entertainment. I used to be a singer. I traveled everywhere. And so Wayne was marketing and finance, and he did outdoors. So one of the first things that he said is like, I want to do this TV show. And I said, okay, well, so he immersed me into looking at outdoor program. I didn't like any of it. I was looking at it. I was like, what is this? This is not, I don't see us. And then I just didn't like the whole aesthetics. And coming from a broadcast background, I'm looking at it and I said, we got to do something different. So what we did, we put the show together. We started talking about historical cultural pieces. We started wanting to dispel the myth. We wanted to show visual representation of Black people in the outdoors that had never been done before. And after we did that, we put it together. We actually had different type of music too, which is also important. So we didn't have the country music, but we did have jazz and blues and R&B and hip hop. And we were talking about things from our perspective because we did know that the public lands belong to everybody. My media background was that my grandmother was a farmer's daughter, and she was down in St. Louis, and they took their land from them. And then they all had to migrate. Grandfather, her dad said, you all got to leave here because they're going to try to kill us and they're taking our land. So we lost all our farmland, and they came to Kansas City. They went to Wichita. They went to Topeka or whatever. So I ended up in Topeka. So my grandmother, one of the things she would do is every year she'd put us in we go in her camper across the country. And I'm a little girl. And so we're going to, like you were saying, like to Yosemite, to the Petrified Forest, to the Grand Canyon, to, the Alamo, all these different things. And she was teaching us as we went. So I had that instilled in me about that. So every year was that, sleeping under the stars. That meant a lot to me. But I'm a city girl. And I live, like I said, Kansas City, and it's full of green and grass or whatever. But then when Wayne and I got together and he said, let's put this outdoor show together, it was on. And since then we've won 75 broadcast awards and 4-time Emmy nominated, and we've been telling these stories ever since. And we always said we were going to celebrate the outdoors. That's how we started. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you so much, Candace, and thank you to the entire group of panelists. And you guys have talked about your enjoyment in the outdoors and how it's been a positive experience for the most part for you. Dave, we have some questions. And we've gotten quite a few, as you mentioned, from the panelists, from the audience over time. In fact, we got over 90 questions. So there's a lot of interest in this, and we realize we need to do something with these questions. And this is all about building a community here. And it's important for us to continue this conversation. So we'll be thinking about ways in which we can do this. So I'll just ask one of the questions that came in. It says, we see avid outdoors people from the Black communities throughout the country enjoying camping, boating, hiking, fishing, birding. But what do you think it takes to make them feel comfortable in the outdoors? And give us some thoughts on those inhibitors and those things that will make them feel uncomfortable, and concerns that they might have about access and enjoying their natural spaces. So we'll start with that, and we'll, since Candace went last, we'll ask Candace. Candace, you have any thoughts on that? Okay, you're trying to get off mute. There you go.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, definitely. Getting people into the outdoors. Well, one of the things we did is, because we wanted to show that it was okay to be in these spaces. And with our show, we wanted to warm it up. And then when we went to these different spots, we wanted people to know that these are okay spots for you to go into. Because once you see, one thing about the power of media, once you see it on TV, people start adjusting and doing these things. So it normalizes it. And we just thought that it was very important to make sure that everybody was included, and to stress the point that outdoors is for everybody. Mm-hmm. And once you see that, you have to, whatever you have been told in the past, because Black people actually have been outdoors forever. We've always been there. There's spaces and designations. When you look at maps all across the country, they'll have different designations, and it starts with the N-word hill, or N-word lake, or N-word. So we've been all these places. It was negative, but it's true. Mm-hmm. So, one, aspect.
Great. Anybody else want to talk about what are your experience? Comfortable ones, uncomfortable ones, outdoors. Panelists?
One thing.
Yes, go ahead. Yes.
One thing I think is important is to recognize that sometimes when you're out in wilderness, you will be uncomfortable. But the key is to become comfortable with that feeling of discomfort. Whenever you're exploring something new, whenever you are truly being a pioneer, you shouldn't really have an expectation that it's going to be easy. It is going to be challenging. But just because it's challenging doesn't mean it's not something that you can embrace. If you're standing there near a highest mountain in North America, Mount McKinley, or that's all you're seeing at that point. That's all you're feeling at that point. You're not thinking about the difficulty it took to get there. You're feeling something stronger. You're feeling something much more spiritual. So any journey, to a national park, to wilderness area, is always a spiritual journey, and every spiritual journey requires a little bit of pain, of discomfort, but nothing is achieved in this life and in this world without some discomfort and without some pain. So I think it's worth it's the trade-off, and I think it's worth that trade-off to make that journey.
Can I jump in here, Mamie? Can I jump in right quick? Yeah. So one of the issues that we see in dealing with this, so I'm talking not only from someone who is from a TV background, but from dealing with someone who's in this space. Some of the issues is you don't see any representation of us. Typically, you go to places and you don't see African Americans that are working in this space. I'm happy to see us all out there, but I'm just as happy to see the Sheltons out there. It gives me a deeper respect that I have some ownership to this. And a lot of times we're discounted. We're kind of there, but we're hidden, And so one of the things I tell people, I'd love to see some of the agencies hire a lot more people or be reflective of the people that are there that have came before us. And I think that's one of the issues a lot of times that we see is when we talk about legacy, and we talk about outdoors, we don't talk about the Dr. Parkers. We don't talk about the Hannibal Boltons. We don't talk about the people that came and made, we don't talk about the people that were part of the Americas that were Black. We have to find it. And I think that's the issue. It should be out there in the public. We shouldn't have to locate it.
Yes, right. A good point. Anything to add, Dr. Chris or Dr. Harrison? Anything you want to add about your experiences outdoors and the positive and the negative? Mostly we're focusing a little bit on the negative. We got to get to some of that. Dr. Chris?
Sure. Yeah. Really briefly, I'll add that for some folks that if this is maybe your first foray as a Black person or a person of color going into green spaces that are maybe outside of your neighborhood, that there can be some levels of threat, right? Kind of Wayne had brought this up, is that not seeing folks like Shelton in this space does provide some level of additional burden that even as resilient as we can be, right, there are levels to this. So I have oftentimes like to tell many of the K through 12 students I talk to, or many of my undergrads or graduate students, that nature is not somewhere far, far away from you where you have to drive to get to it. It's quite literally in your backyard. You can walk to it. It's under your feet. And in that way, I like to think that our connection to the land and to the landscape, right? Everywhere we're sitting right now, for instance, right? Your house is on top of soil. And that soil is some humus, which is microbacteria and the worms and any of the other organisms that live in it. Probably near you are some levels of different types of vegetation. Like experiencing those and listening to those organisms and their stories is just as important as, say, Yosemite. And making sure that we have the ability to belong means not just having the resiliency, but creating the policies that actually allow us to belong and to live in the spaces, right? And that should seem like it's the bare minimum, but we need to be able to live in those spaces and be safe in those spaces and to do the work that we do, but to also enjoy it without the other societal factors. And that means for me, right, for instance, when I do my research, I'm a field ecologist. I oftentimes wear jackets that are embroidered with, say, the Point Defiance Zoo and Aquarium, which we work with. So in that way, folks think I'm official, right? I go with other people. So in that way, I'm not perceived as not belonging in that space. I shouldn't have to do that. It's my job to be a field ecologist. I shouldn't have to do that. So I work to make sure that those on the come up don't have to do the same thing.
Great.
Hey, maybe can I share something real quick?
Yes.
Quick. When I working in Yosemite, basically my first job in Yellowstone National Park was as an entrance station ranger. So I was at the West Gate, the busiest entrance to Yellowstone National Park, the world's first national park, and I was the only African-American ranger in Yellowstone at that time. And one day, when I was sitting there at the kiosk, a car pulled up, and it was an African-American family of four, the mom, the dad, and two kids, a boy and a girl. And when they looked at me and saw me sitting in that kiosk, they were absolutely shocked. They were not expecting to see me. And the father looked at me and he said, "You are the last thing I expected to see at this gate." And I said, "Well, take a good look, because I'm the only one." And he looked at me and we talked, and I looked behind him, and his daughter and his son, their son was right in the back, and they were looking at me just like this. They were shocked to see I was the first African-American ranger that they had ever seen.
And they were proud.
And they were proud. And when those kids saw me there in my uniform, they were thrilled. I mean, they looked like they had been anesthetized when the car first pulled up. They were not interested. They were not excited. But I already knew they were about to enter a wonderland. They were about to see things they had never even imagined in their life. They were about to see geysers, eruptive hot springs. They might see a grizzly bear. They'll see elk. So I knew what was ahead of them down that road, but they didn't. All they knew was they were being dragged by mom and dad to some strange place in the middle of Wyoming. But when they saw me and an African-American was there to greet them to this wonderland, that made a profound impact. And that impact happened because I took a risk years earlier to put on that uniform, to venture out to Wyoming in a Greyhound bus in the hope that one day I could pass it on to someone else. Because I know that sometimes there are places in this world that beat and defeat any dream that anyone could imagine, and they're real, and they're in the national parks. That impacted me, and I just wanted to pass that on. And I think that's why I did it. Maybe I became a ranger just to meet that one family. Venturing into Yellowstone for the first time. But I tell you right now, the look in those kids' faces, I'll never forget it. I've met hundreds of thousands of people since then, but I can still see those two kids looking at me, swiveling in their seat, waving goodbye as the car drove off into Yellowstone National Park.
Thank you so much for sharing that experience. So Dave, those are some of the questions that I had. And while you look for your question, I'll tell you, one of the things that Dr. Drew Lathan said is, as a birder, he said, you can take these, laugh or cry. He said, be prepared to be confused with one other Black birder, carry your binoculars, and 3 forms of identification at all times. He said, don't bird in a hoodie. And he said, nocturnal birding is a no-no. And he said, care more about yourselves and others than you care, as much as you care about endangered species. These were some of his tips on being a Black birder. And he's a great writer. We didn't get him tonight, but we really like some of the things that he said. So Dave, I'm going to turn it over to you right now, and you can guide us through our next session.
Sure. Yeah. I just want to highlight the theme that I heard all of you guys talking about, and that is visibility and how critically important it is, and how that really needs to be, an element in, where we go from here, making sure that the Black community is visible in outdoor spaces. That's a first step. And I just wanted to call that out because I heard each of you kind of reference that in there. And so my question is getting at, and I see a similar question to the one I'm about to ask coming up in the comments here, but it's focusing on what has been successful at bringing visibility and bringing that safety that's so desperately needed. So let me just read the question. Let's discuss some progress to date relative to successful models by NGOs and by federal, state, and local agencies to address issues of access and safety. What are some of the priority actions that we can work on with the Black communities to provide more access and safe spaces, and what has yet to be done? So let's just focus on what do you think is working now? Who wants to take that?
Okay, I will. So everybody kind of paused and took a break. Well, as someone who sat on the federal advisory committees, one of the things that we look at is we look at policies. And the federal advisory committee I sit on is the Hunting and Shooting Sports Conservation Council. It is through Fish and Wildlife Service, Department of Interior, Ag. And one of the things I think is so important is the shared stewardship that they're doing out here. And what that means is, with shared stewardship, is creating opportunities for people of color to have safe spaces in there. One of the things that we worked with them is we do a national tour for fishing engaging for kids in urban and rural communities. And by showing that shared stewardship, what we also do is we bring scientists, environmentalists to come and engage these kids at where they're at. What has happened is that creates a pipeline for them to look at students looking at this field, but also it takes away some of the stigma that we have where they're uncomfortable with being in this natural spaces. Like Shelton said, he was the last person that those two kids was expecting to see. But I believe they still remember his face because they're, and that's one of the things that we work on. We do this all across the country, and it's just amazing. One of the things also that I think is important is there needs to be some training also internally with some of the agencies. There's some of the hardest people I deal with are the people they're saying they're looking to recruit and engage urban communities because they want to. I always tell a person you can't segregate outreach, and they have this idea of the perfect African American or the perfect. And one of the things is, some of the issues are internal. So we talk about how do we train them and how do we make this. Because if the agencies are not supportive of it, or the people on the ground are not supportive of it, it's going to be a disconnect. So I think really going in, looking at the training, creating opportunity, and again, I'm going to go back, more people that look diverse in these natural spaces.
Great.
And as a federal person, I think I should just speak to this real quick. I'm the community engagement specialist for Yosemite National Park. That's my new position. And so my job is to connect with communities that don't necessarily feel a historic connection to Yosemite and by extension to all the national parks. And I think the easiest way to do all of this is to be just real, to be genuine in reaching out and trying to connect these people to places that they already own. There's nothing more powerful than an open door, or not even a door. It's just a doorway that you can walk through. And so when you have a history of segregation rather than a history of integration, a history of separate and not equal, that's part of our past, but the past lives on. So that's part of the problem. We still live with what we have experienced in the past, but those days are gone. The parks are open for everyone. It is America's best idea. And that's the strongest thing to communicate, is that children of color should have an experience of wonder. And that experience of wonder is right out through the gate of the national parks. But you have to take that challenge of saying, can I take my family to these places? What will they receive? What kind of experience they will have? It makes sense for a parent to be a little bit nervous about whether or not they're going to be treated well. But these are national parks, and this is the post-civil rights movement. So a lot of those battles have been fought. They don't necessarily need to be refought. We just have to be there willing to claim something that we already own.
That's so cool.
And I also think, and I wanted to say that with the agencies, I think internally they have a culture that they're going to have to get hold of. They're going to have to make some changes internally, because you have people that work within the agencies that are not ready for diversity and inclusion and real intentional diversity. So that has to start internally with the agency, and they have to hire more people that look like us. They're going to have to hire them, put them in position, and also let them move up into leadership positions and actually include their conversation on what's really going on. Because if you don't break that up inside the agency, and they have problems in there. They have some dismal records of hiring African Americans, and they don't move up. So we already know that a lot of that does exist. So that has to change. But you also have allies within the agencies that are ready to help and who believe in diversity and inclusion full forth and will do great things to make it happen, and make sure that you get the funding. Because a lot of times when you work, you need funding behind the different projects that you do. And a lot of times with us, we don't get the funding, or if you do, you get the little pennies, where your counterpart, the other traditional sports person or traditional group, they get millions of dollars. We know someone who gets $1 million a month to do projects, similar projects that we do. So these are real issues. So that has to be changed internally first. They need to look within themselves, to start out, and then a lot of that works.
Yeah, and those conversations are happening. As someone who works for the federal government, they are happening. And I've had nothing but support in bringing back the story of the Buffalo soldiers who protected Yosemite and Sequoia over 100 years ago. So
yes, National Parks has been doing some phenomenal work, but you also have U.S. Fish and Wildlife, you have U.S. Forest Service, so all of those, and BLM. All of those particular conversations had to take place with them as well, and they do need to hire more people. Like we had Dr. Parker. When I first started, I was looking, which was 22 years ago when we started doing the TV show, I was looking for people, Black women or men that were in the space, and I couldn't find any, but I ran across Dr. Parker, and I called her, and she responded. And it's been it's been great. She's wonderful.
Let's hear from Harrison. He said he wanted to answer the second part of this question, Dave, I think.
Yeah, David, if I remember correctly, you were suggesting what might be some steps moving forward. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I mean, what can we? Yeah, I'll read the second part of the question again, just for everybody. What are some of the priority actions that we can work with the Black community on to provide more access and safe spaces? What has yet to be done?
Yeah, I want to reiterate really the story from Shelton about, you know, that family that came to the park and saw him at the entrance, and this idea of socialization, right? Which, again, as a social scientist, this is something that I'm, you know, very much involved with. This idea that our kids, youth of color, are socialized to believe that certain behaviors are appropriate based on their race. Right. And so when our Black children turn on the television, you know, and they're constantly sort of being bombarded with images of entertainers and athletes that sort of sets them on a certain trajectory versus images of people outdoors or images of doctors, you know, and if we remember 2 years ago, this is why the movie Black Panther was such a success, was because that was the first time that we had seen sort of this blockbuster, screen, movie on the big screen for our youth. And so it's this idea that are we really investigating how do we socialize and begin at an early age to sort of instill these messages that these outdoors belong to you. Also from a research standpoint, I remember my days as a graduate student, and we would talk about outdoors and wilderness, and it was always presented that there was a certain idea of what outdoors and wilderness was and what it wasn't, right? So there was a group that was sort of defining, this is what the outdoors are, and this is the appropriate way to enjoy the outdoors. And it appears that really one of the things that we are not doing is everyone on this panel has acknowledged that there has been a historical connection, that even predates slavery between people of African diaspora and land and the outdoors. But we don't tell those stories enough. We don't investigate, from what I've seen, we don't really investigate how have these people, traditionally enjoyed the outdoors in these natural spaces, and maybe how do we position our parks and our wildlands in order to, speak to that. Instead, it's sort of this perspective of we've built this and now we want you to come and enjoy it in our way. And I think that it's critical that we start to ask different questions and that we move beyond what I see almost as like a census of, this number of African Americans visit the park, this number of white Americans visit the park, this number of Asian Americans visit the park. And then we come up with a random explanation for why. And then we try to apply that to an entire group of people when we all know that we're not a monolith, right? And I think that now is the time, and we've been saying this for, generations. I'm not the first researcher to think this way or to ask these questions, but we really need to start digging a little bit deeper and putting in the hard work of saying, how do we really fundamentally understand how the multitude of ways in which wilderness and outdoor is defined by African Americans, and what is the multitude of ways in which these groups of people have enjoyed these spaces, and how can we begin to then meet them in that manner, as opposed to here's our park, enjoy it, and if you don't want to enjoy it the way that we've built it, then you need to find something else to do with your time.
All right, good. Dave, did you have another question?
We've got 90 of them. So. Did you have one that you wanted to ask? Because I have a couple more, but I have to toggle over here to get to them.
Okay,
Can I say something? Can I say something right quick? Because I think there's an important thing that I've been seeing for the last 4 years. Everything has been really touchy, and everyone's been able to in this space. It's just everything has been like the Wild Wild West. But what has happened for me, I took a negative and make it a positive. Now I really, used to be people who really didn't want to do diversity. They would have meetings and they would hide behind. Nowadays they tell you that they don't want to do diversity and inclusion, and so they're out. So what has happened is it's allowed me to see the people that were just talking about it and not wanting to do the work. So really, I tell people when I'm in these agency spaces, that if the person doesn't want to do the work, move them out of the way. I don't want them to lose their job, but put someone in there that wants to do the work. Before it was hidden. Now we know, because everybody's kind of uncorked right now. They say what they want back. So I think that's something that needs to be brought up, that if you got someone that don't want to do the work, don't force them, move them. Give us something that's in the space, and that's just real talk. Because you have some people, and they'll have a meeting after meeting after meeting, knowing darn well they ain't plan on doing nothing. And so yeah. That's what in this last 4 years I've had, I've worked with some of these people, and I realized the 4 years before they were just talking because it was part of them checking a box. So we need to get those box checkers out the way and move out the way so we can get some work done.
Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit. I want to unpack that a little bit more, because I think that there's a lot of maybe sort of surface level efforts that are happening, that have happened. Checking a box, hiring an intern, that kind of thing. How do nonprofit organizations, agencies, how do you really institute authentic change that's going to get at the deeper things that you are all talking about, and that kind of systemic change? What are your recommendations, best practices? And again, it could be a nonprofit setting, it could be a corporate setting, it could be an agency. Just any insights on things that you think are actually working now, and if you can't think of examples of that, what do we need to do to get there?
All right, I'll jump in real quick, and I'm gonna shut up. I sit on a diversity joint venture. The diversity joint venture is a venture between National Parks, Fish and Wildlife Service, Forest Service, Interior, Ag, and what it was designed for initially was to create a more diverse working space in the environmental space. So, and so they created this model to work on how could we strategically work on getting more women, more African Americans in this space. The model worked, but what we found out was that every step we took, it was taken back. I think the model could work and what they did is they were creating toolkits on how to get them in there, but also working with the hiring managers, because if you could have the best candidate, but if the hiring manager doesn't like the candidate because he can't say his name, then there's an issue. So, and we ran into that. So there's something that's in process working right now that we're working on that I think that's out there. We just need to pick it up. A lot of things that were in this space was dropped. So I have a feeling that a lot of things are going to be picked back up. But that's one thing that we have worked on, a model that we have worked on.
One thing I want to communicate real quickly. It's not just so much getting people of color, especially African Americans, into these spaces. So much of change has to be internally driven, not externally driven. And a lot of African Americans and people of color don't know literally what they're missing by not being at the edge of the Grand Canyon, by not being in Zion Canyon, by not walking through a geyser basin in Yellowstone National Park. They may have heard something peripherally about these things, but they've not seen it or heard it with their own eyes. So when change really happens, when it's from the inside out, never from the outside in. And so if you have a childhood that's spent in a national park and you're with your family, you will forever connect those memories of being in this incredible landscape with the people who matter most to you in your life. A childhood in the parks can change everything. And every kid deserves that childhood of wonder. And so few Black and brown kids do not have that experience of walking along the edge of the Grand Canyon, being in Zion National Park, being in a wild river. They don't have those experiences. And if you don't have experiences like that, how can you imagine them? So what we need to really be doing is feeding the imagination of our youth so that when they get old enough to seek a career, the first thing that pops in their mind is, I want to be a fisheries biologist. I want to be a zoologist. I want to work as a ranger in Yellowstone. They would have those dreams if they had been seeded in them years and years earlier during their youth. That's the key. And that's why when I met that family in Yellowstone 30 years ago, and the kids were waving at me, I still wonder to this day, what seed did I plant when they saw their first black park ranger in Yellowstone National Park?
So that is great. So Dave, I had a question. Thank you for those. There's a question here that someone asked, how do we deal with white people in powerful positions that don't believe fear and exclusion and all of these things exist? Does anybody want to take that one on?
Well, I usually don't deal with them because there's other white people that are in those powerful spaces that will work with you. So if they don't want to work with you, you don't need to work with them anyway. So you find somebody else, because they're allies everywhere, and they will work with you. I know personally, I've had that happen to me. We had the ones who didn't want to work with us and tell us, like in fact, when we first started, they called us in outdoors. That was our title from a lot of the people. They laughed at us. We went through a whole lot of different things. But I did find allies within, and there are powerful white people that will work with you and actually from their heart. And actually, you don't even have to work hard with them. It's just automatic. But there's more, I think, of the other than it is of the ones that want to work with you.
The Colin O'Maras.
Yeah, he's great. He's an ally.
And that's real. That's real talk. Being in a council where we all sit together, there was people that I sit across from in the council that absolutely couldn't stand me, but I'm in the room and I'm giving recommendations, but I had to have a support mechanism and allies like the Collins or individuals like that said, okay, yeah, I know it's a problem. What do we do to get around it? And what do we do to make change? And Shelton, I got to say this. We are all proud of you when we see you, because I was able to talk about I was able to take what you did and show young men and women and people of all spaces that, look, he's out there. There's this space. So I think you're one of those individuals that I call pioneers that we need to see. People need to see that. And as much as I was excited that Oprah was with you, I was more excited about seeing you.
I'm excited about seeing you right now, and I'm lonely out here.
We coming to see you.
and those are the things. So I just wanted to say allies, figuring out the allies, and it's not going to be easy. It never is.
But I think
I want to share something real quick about. Oh no, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think you all are also, talking about the next step beyond just out enjoying the outdoors to understanding the careers and understanding the future that you can have, engaging in the outdoors as a livelihood and creating opportunities for others, that's a totally different animal, right? So there's this one conversation over here about how do we just sort of get people exposed and we create those spaces, but there's a whole nother conversation that we're still not adequately addressing about how do we really have teenagers going off to college or going off into the workforce saying this is the career for me, right? And not, oh, I'm just going to do engineering because that's something that I've heard of, or I'm going to do education because that's something I'm familiar with, but understanding that no, you have in your description of what the outdoors does for the imagination and what it does for wonderment, Shelton, is just it is so important to understand that you can have that experience every single day. You can wake up and spend every single day reconnecting with yourself and reconnecting with land, and I think that's another message that we have to really work on and understanding how do we challenge that.
But that's why I'm saying it's so powerful that when an African American family drives up to an entrance station, there's an African American at the entrance station. They go to their campground. There's an African-American ranger at the campground. They go to the visitor center, to find out about what trails are available. There's an African-American ranger at the visitor center. Then they're driving in a hurry to get to the trailhead to get pulled over by a law enforcement officer. The law enforcement officer is African-American and says, take it slow. You're in a national park. Have a great hike. The more we see ourselves reflected in these environments, and it can do wonders in terms of changing the innate perception that many African-Americans have about police, about law enforcement, But if they see someone who is law enforcement that's African American, there's already a layer that's been dropped from there of feeling resistance, of feeling threatened, and that's a very powerful thing. And that's why I think it's important that both sides.
Shelton or others on the panel, you know, the one question we hear all of the time is that we can't find them.
Oh.
They're not there. You know, they don't want to apply for the positions. So I want us to speak to that. I don't know who can, but somebody, we have to address it, because that's one of the issues that's often the challenge that we hear about.
Yes, that's always been the biggest, I'm just going to say it, the biggest lie going, you know, in all areas, in the outdoors, but in any part of America, job, anything, they always say that they cannot find us. And we are here. We've always been here, and we are ready. And, you know, we know how to do all kind of variety of different things. I mean, that's why they brought us here in the first place. It's because we were skilled. You know, we were skilled. We were whisperers. We were part of the land. We knew how to do. We knew how to build everything. We had just knowledge, unbelievable knowledge, and we were kings and queens and all of that. So we were brought here, and we still have that in our DNA. So we could do any job that anybody puts before us, and once we get it, we got it, and we're gone, and we excel and make it. You know, it's excellence always there. So we are there. Our children are there. There's a bunch of different. You know, there's manners. There's different organizations that are preparing young people to go into these spaces. And we work with kids, you know, we do a national kids fishing derby that we've been doing for the last 15 years. And we take children, you know, from the city, and we provide them their maybe the first time they catch a fish. We have a pond. We find it in every urban core from LA to Washington, D.C. on the National Mall. We did it there, you know, Atlanta, Ferguson, Missouri, Kansas City. And we provide children their first time to fish. And those children and their parents always tell me, thank you, because I have a kid that plays football, does music, but I have this other kid that's a little, you know, weird, and they do that nature thing. I said, give them to us. And then we start segueing them, you know, and they come, and we connect them to, you know, to people within the agencies, and we try to find the jobs. But then once they get to the agencies, sometimes they don't get the job, you know, so that's where it falls through. Sometimes they get the internships, and they're stuck there. So it's a lot of, you know, I'm just keeping it real, and like I always do.
Yes, you can. Hey, Dave, is there one more question before we close it out? Again, we got 90 questions. We can't answer them.
So we've got about 10 more minutes before we wrap. And so let me ask this question. This is one of the ones that was submitted. And again, anybody can respond to this. Have the events of 2020, particularly the pandemic and the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement in national consciousness, helped or hindered Black people experiencing the outdoors safely? Any thoughts?
Well, I'll say it again. Black Lives Matter it's a beautiful thing, because we do matter, and people need to know that we matter, always have mattered, you know, and everybody knows that they just ignored us, but we always there, and things are changing. We hit 400 years. Things have changed, and it's broke, and you have a demographic shift or whatever. So, and there's more coming up, and the young people are coming up. I have kids or young adults, and they keep me straight all the time. I have a Gen Z. It's unbelievable, the things that she comes up with. But yeah, Black Lives Matter has helped us in the pandemic. Actually, what happened with that, it gave us the opportunity to sit back and understand who we are on this earth. God's in control, and yes, we're going to succeed in this. And like I said, we didn't do our normal kids fishing derbies out there because of the pandemic, and we were concerned about our children and our families. So we did virtual derbies, and it did work. We had to get creative. So like, you know, like Black people do, we always get creative. We take that lemon, make that lemonade, or whatever we need to do. We're going to do that.
Well, also, I'll jump in here. One of the other things that allowed with this pandemic, there was more people at homes, more people online, more people connecting with us, more people asking questions about these spaces. You know, I was so amazed when we had people reaching out and saying, hey, I want to do this now. I see this. I wasn't aware, because they were more online getting involved. But what I found out also in this space was they were going like, okay, why hadn't I known about this before? How can I get connected in here? So yes, in a sense, there is more of awareness. But what it also did for us is, we had to be creative and be able to get information, because people were going out, and you had we did a piece called "What to Do and What Not to Do in the Forest," because people were going out and just being wilding out. And so we wanted to say that you have to recreate responsibly. So yes, it helped. But I think there's more that we can do. And it's really about, I always tell people, COVID doesn't stop in the outdoors. You still got to be safe out there. So it was a positive. It was a positive.
Great. Hey, how about if we hear from Dr. Chris? Dr. Chris, we haven't heard from you for a while. You want to take a stab at Dave's question regarding COVID or any other subject matter that you want to talk about?
Yeah, sure. I think a lot of the panelists had some really awesome things that I'm super jiving with. And I just want to add that as we're thinking about the love and joy of being outdoors and being Black, and making sure that we amplify the stories of those that have already been there, including many of my esteemed panelists that I look up to, it's also important to talk about structure and systemic oppression, because of the fact that, like, if we were to talk about this idea called the leaky pipeline, right? There may be somebody that is on the come up, K through 12 students that we see that we're in a white space, and we are very much exciting them about being in that space. So then they come to college or they go to high school, right? First off, and they start taking science classes, but they're not validated there. They're told by their teacher, well, maybe you won't cut it. They still keep going with it, but then they go to undergrad. They take a couple courses in the sciences and they don't do so well. And then they're told again, well, maybe you don't do so great. They try and go to graduate school, but when they go to graduate school, they get immense depression or anxiety because their advisors tell them that they're disappointed in them, or that you're not cut out for this, or that if you had the passion, you could do it. These are all stories I've heard before, right? We are in the front lines of all of the passion and the joy of many of these Black kids loving nature being wrung out of them as they go through the pipeline. And we have to stop that, meaning fixing the leaky pipeline talks about deconstruction, reconciliation, community mobilization, completely changing the way in which we do the academy, completely changing the way in which we evaluate what talent is. Because there's a whole bunch of talent out there. But unfortunately, many of the structures that are put in place are white supremacy, and they're systemically unjust. So I love to think that all of us on this call, we are loving nature, and also there are the economic concerns. Many of the, say for instance, opportunities that exist sometimes are volunteer, and many communities don't have the money to be able to participate in that. So I like to think that, like, yes, the joy, the resilience is all important, and it shouldn't be all on our shoulders. Just like it's not on all Black people's shoulders to solve racism, it's not on all of our shoulders to figure out who can be in and belong in nature and be in all of the jobs that we see right here. It takes very, very substantive change. And yeah, that change is going to be painful, but on the other end of that change is going to be a whole lot of bliss, where we not only save ourselves, but we save the planet. And guess what? Mother Earth doesn't really care if we are here or not. Like, if we gone in 1,000 years, we'd be like, all right, bye. Like, they're gone, right? So it's our responsibility to shepherd what this looks like into the future.
Wow.
Absolutely.
Wow. What do you think, Dave? Where should we go from here? Should we move on?
We've got about 5 minutes, and we do have a couple, things in closing that we want to remind folks about. I do have one more question that I want to throw in there that I think is important. And again, some of the folks in the chat address this. Mm-hmm. So a question we got was, how do intersecting identities such as LGBTQ+ and disability and others influence outdoor participation by Black people? And the context there is just what some of you have already said, that the Black community isn't a monolith. There's incredible diversity within it, and amongst allies. So how do all of those intersections help or hinder the access and the safety aspect of the Black community experiencing nature.
Dr. Harrison, you want to take a shot at that one?
It's maybe a big question to ask with a few minutes left, but any.
I was like, wow, that's a large question. I wouldn't even attempt to guess at how it helps or hinders. I think that we know that even within racialized groups, racial and ethnic groups, that there is still some level of discrimination that takes place, right? Again, based on sex and gender identity. And so I can see how that can further complicate things. But I think, again, as a social scientist, it still comes down to, we really need to get people who are like-minded together, not just researchers, but people who are enthusiasts, people who are professionals working in these spaces. And we really need to come together and find ways to, adequately answer these questions so that, we can reach that goal where, regardless of those intersections, you can enjoy that experience. You can engage that experience that Shelton has, so vividly described, that you have a real opportunity to engage in that. And I don't know that we really have an answer yet as to how, LGBTQ, we can make assumptions based on what we're seeing in other settings, but I don't know that, from my work, I don't know that we have a immediate answer. And I think that that's another one of those areas that we just really need people pulling together and starting to answer those questions in a meaningful way. And again, it's not just passing out surveys and saying, all right, we reached a certain end and we ran our statistical analysis. Now let's hit it and, move on. But really, no, let's take the time to talk to people and really understand, those nuanced experiences.
Great.
Thank you.
I just wanted to say something. Did I have a minute? I
Yep.
just want to say, like, one of the reasons that we had created Urban American Outdoors is that we wanted to be sure that we were full inclusive. And we have included all communities in everything that we do. When we do our events, we invite everybody and they all come. We had children. I had a lady who called me who said that I have an autistic group. Can they come? Because many times we are told that we can't come because we don't have, our children may be out of control. And I said, bring the babies to our fishing derby. I said, you get them by the water, watch what happens, and they catch a fish. And it happened. We were in LA, and one of the children that were there happened to be Faith Evans' child. He is autistic, and he caught fish, and he was so happy. And when we were in the Washington Mall in D.C., another autistic child, they were biggest fish. The biggest fish was caught. So we have our disability community, and then we also have our community, LGBT community. They're there. We embrace everybody because they are us, and we are them. And so all should be included in everything. It shouldn't even be, the thought that why are they separate? Why are they separate? Why are we separate? We're all on this earth together and we all belong here. God created all of us, so this is going to change. The dynamics is going to change coming up in the future, regardless of what anybody thinks or wants. Nature, you can't play with nature. She's going to be in charge and it's going to work the way it's going to work. And we here.
Can I say one last thing? And because no one's talked about it. Another thing that's very important that we talk about is we should be talking about about policies, the lawmakers. There should be something that we should be able to put into law. One of the issues that we run into a lot of times is so gray that they can just wash over it. And so I want to say that's some of the things that we should be looking at policy. But the last thing I want to say is I got this young lady down here that hasn't said anything, and I'm wanting to hear her voice, and I've been waiting to hear your voice.
Yeah, we're going to hear from her. But I see, Lynn, you typed something in the chat. Did you want to say anything about did you put something in the chat, Lynn Scarlett? I wasn't for sure. No, you're good. You good?
I put something in the chat that was just, I love this conversation. Like others, I could keep on listening.
I wish that we had an infinite amount of time, but we are pretty much out of time here. So
That went fast.
One last statement.
Just very quickly say thank you to everybody on the panel tonight. You're tremendous. The opportunity to hear and share your stories with the huge amount of people that are listening and watching tonight is something that we're super proud to be able to help facilitate at the National Wildlife Federation. Again, shout out to the co-sponsors of this event, Outdoor Afro, Black AF and STEM, Patagonia, and the Lynx Incorporated. The message that we all have to work together on this, I think, is heard loud and clear. And I think this panel, which by the way, is the first of 3 that we're doing. And so one of my duties here is to remind everybody today that on January 12th, the next Creating Safe Spaces Roundtable panel discussion is going to be happening. So that's January 12th. And then on February 2nd will be the 3rd one. So stay tuned, follow the National Wildlife Federation channels on social media, and we'll make sure that you know about it. And so I'm going to stop there and hand it back over to Mamie.
Thank you so much, David. I appreciate being a part of this with you, and I look forward to those in the future that we'll have. Please, please, please don't go and leave us yet until you hear the final word, because you've heard from Shelton, you've heard from Harrison, Dr. Chris, Wayne, Candace, and everyone how important that the next generation of conservationists and environmentalists, outdoors people are important. And so we would like to now introduce Sanaya Kitchum, and she is worked with the Lynx Incorporated in their STEM Ready Garden for Wildlife. The Lynx Incorporation, we have a partnership with the National Wildlife Federation to build gardens throughout this country. Lynx are about 17,000 African-American Black women all over the country in 588 chapters. And so, Sanaya, would you come forth and call us to action and encourage us to keep going and growing?
Yes. Hello, I'm Sanaya Kinchin. I'm a 16-year-old junior at St. Teresa's Academy in Kansas City, Missouri. I have volunteered with Mohives KC and the Lynx Incorporated National Wildlife STEM Ready Garden for the past year. Today, I just wanted to share with you all from a teen's perspective how important it is to get outside. Being outdoors in this capacity was new for me, and before I knew it, I was learning a lot of things that connected to my future goals. I found myself learning more about how the food we planted produces food for the bees, and in turn produces more food for the betterment of our health and wellness. It's been really fun and challenging. I really want to encourage other young people to think about spending some fun but safe hours connecting outdoors and all the nature that surrounds us. Mohives has been a great opportunity for me to get outdoors in the midst of a pandemic. I would like to say thank you to the panel. I really enjoyed actively listening and learning from you all. Before I go, I would have to say hi to my grandmother, Helen Casey, who's a member of the Lynx Incorporated in the Jackson County, Missouri chapter. And I would also like to end by saying thank you to my mentor, pediatrician, and all-around second mother, Dr. Miriam Pearson. She's the co-founder of Mohives and also a member of the Lynx Incorporated. Thank you, Dr. P, for getting me involved and trusting me to share my experiences tonight.
Wow. Thank you. Boy, you have chill bumps just hearing that and knowing you want to continue to work, keep going and growing. So as we close, we say thank you all so very much for this wonderful opportunity. We thank Rebecca, we thank Julia from the National Wildlife Federation. We also really appreciate the work that we've gotten and the support we've gotten from John Robbins, who's a board member, and you'll see him in the next panel. Panelists, you exceeded all of our expectations. Again, I knew that you would do that. So we really appreciate your being here and appreciate all that you've done. So we look forward to seeing you all again, as David has said, January 12th, February 2nd. And again, thank you to the National Wildlife Federation, Colin O'Mare and Mustafa Ali for you all's abilities and giving us the support that we need. So good night, everybody, and have a happy holiday.